Welcome back to another edition of Elevate Your Grind, brought to you by the Cannabis Lab. I am your host, Todd Rosales, and welcome everybody to another edition of our show. I hope everybody had a great month. We're at the end of August here. I hope everybody is enjoying themselves. I know we have a couple conferences coming up. I'm excited for them, so you might see me out at those shows. Hopefully this whole Delta variant thing doesn't throw that off, because I'm really looking forward to getting back into the mix, getting back into the conferences and hanging out with all my friends again. That is why I started this podcast, and that is my favorite thing about the cannabis show. Folks, before we get into it, today's episode is brought to you by our sponsors at Contempo Specialty Packaging. You know me, I've said it 100 times. I said it one time, I'll say it again. There is really no great packaging in the cannabis industry right now. There's good packaging, great, maybe not. But at the end of the day, there's a ton of waste. There's a ton of plastic. I know we have to meet compliance, but I think there's ways that we can do better. And that is where Contempo Specialty Packaging comes in with their offerings made of 100% hemp. That's right, folks. We are finally wrapping cannabis in cannabis. Now, the nice thing about Contempo is the 100% hemp is only one of the many offerings that they have. They have a ton of great offerings that I can walk you through here in just a second, but they come from a 40-year packaging background, servicing the top brands in the world of fashion, and have over 4 years in the cannabis packaging experience. They work with many of the largest operators in the industry, and their 100% hemp packaging, as I said before, this one right here is only one of many options. This is a really cool, nice hemp natural package. You can see they can do all sorts of beautiful designs to make you stand out from the crowd. What I really like, and I use these actually in my personal use now, are these really cool joint tins that just slide open, and these are reusable, which I think is really cool from a packaging standpoint. And then they actually have, this is a singular tin. This is for vape cartridges, but to me, I think that's really cool just to keep a single joint in. This would be really cool for gram joints and everything else like that. So if you like the packaging that you saw here, if you're in need of packaging, then please head over to contempopackaging.com. That is contempopackaging.com. They have child resistant packaging. They have the 100% packaging and all of the options that I showed you. Like I said, this packaging is exceptional. I keep it on my desk. I've shown everyone that I talk to. Head to contempopackaging.com. All right. Today's guest. It's interesting. Today's guest actually came to me because of another guest that had to cancel. And, it's sometimes when that happens, it's interesting how it goes, but I'm actually really excited to talk about today's guest because his story is absolutely incredible. His company is phenomenal. He's had one hell of an entrepreneurial journey. And you guys know on this show, I'm very interested in the journey because there are just people out there that are willing to do things that other folks won't. And that's what makes them special, right? My guest today, I believe, embodies that. I believe he embodies the entrepreneurial spirit. And I think, a story like his is what inspires people to keep going. So with that being said, without any further ado, please welcome, I really need to start asking people their last name because I'm going to butcher it again, but Tim Conder, the president of Blackbird. Tim, thank you for joining me.
Absolutely, Todd. No, you said it perfectly, man.
Thank you. It was an easier one, but I'm just like that kind of gave me a false sense of security. I'm like, it sounds too easy. There's like a hidden letter in there somewhere. Had to be.
Yeah, lots of people say Conder, like the bird, but I always say no, it's like the last name, not the bird.
Very cool, man.
Conder, you nailed it.
So Blackbird, I've got to be honest with you, right? So we talked right before the show where I worked before coming to Heisman, right? I was at Spring Big. So most of what I know about Blackbird is from within the walls of Spring Big. I've looked into you guys a lot. I competed against you guys out in Nevada from a standpoint too. And I can tell you it was hard. It was very hard, man. But talk to me about the company in general, because as I understood it, there was a marketing component to it, but really the meat and potatoes of Blackbird is delivery logistics and kind of also wholesale retail connection. Am I on the right path? Just give us kind of a general overview.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you're on the right path, Todd. I mean, what I would say is that ultimately Blackbird is focused on connecting brands and retailers to end consumers, right? And we do that through our infrastructure of B2B2C distribution. So moving product from cultivation and production to retail, and then ultimately on to the consumer. And like, that's our focus. We're transportation people that worked in transportation and logistics before we got into cannabis and saw an opportunity to bring our unique expertise to the area of on-demand logistics and the software that facilitates that physical transportation.
So there's a few camps of people that get into this industry as entrepreneurs, right? You have the folks that were affected by something and cannabis helped them, or that a family member was affected by something and cannabis helped them and it helped break the stigma. Then there are those that were passionate about the plant and were entrepreneurs in their own right in another industry or another part of the world, and realize that they can take their skill set into the cannabis space because they were passionate about it. And I believe that's the category that you fall into. But, you didn't just cut your teeth in cannabis. You had a very successful business, for a while before you started Blackbird with if I understand, a bike mobile courier service, which I think that was founded 2008, 2009, after the internet. I imagine if you met with a VC and said, yeah, I'm going to put a bunch of guys on bikes and deliver messages, they'd be like, there's email, right? What led you to, because obviously it's still around. It was the foundation for what Blackbird was to become. What led you to think, I don't want to say backwards, but almost by simplifying everything and saying, hey, this is still a thing and this is still needed, and we're going to be the people that do that? What gave you that idea?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I sort of backed in. I lucked into it, right? Like, bicycles have always been a big part of my life, whether it's from a social or health aspect. And so I've always been a big bicycle rider. I lived in San Francisco for better part of a decade, and knew some bicycle messengers in that city who introduced me to that as a way to make money, right? As a way to make an income. And so I became a bicycle messenger in San Francisco and messaged in other cities across the country, and ultimately really fell in love with it, right? Not just because I was already passionate about bicycles, but ultimately found a home amongst that culture, right? Like, it's a very specific culture. Really close ties with friends and other people that work within that industry, even still to this day. And I would liken it very, very much to cannabis, right? Like, people that are really passionate about what they do. And I think the reality is that while most of our lives have become digital, right? Like, there are still physical products, cannabis being one of them, that need to be moved from point A to point B, and the courier industry at large is no different, right? Like, obviously a huge drop off with the invention of email, in the 90s, but the courier trade is still alive and well in big cities across the country, and even in secondary markets like where I live in Reno, Nevada.
Very cool, man. It's an interesting ability to be able to see a hole in the market with something that's not a cutting edge technology, being able to fill it with something that already exists and is starting to be looked past, if you will. I mean, I can probably go off on a whole nother hour tangent with you on just bicycling in general. It's one of my preferred ways to work out. Not the Peloton. I hate indoor biking, like getting out on the bike in the sun and everything else. And it's funny, I actually integrate cannabis into that workout routine a lot, because there have been times where it's like, I don't want to go on the bike ride. It's too hot. I don't feel like doing the 10 miles. I don't feel like going on this boring track because there's not much turnings and everything else. I'll smoke and I'll be like, it would be nice to go for a bike ride. And I'm like, you know what? Just go out there and pedal. You don't need to beat your time or anything else like that. And next thing you know, I look down and it's the fastest time I've done in 2 months, because I'm just not paying attention. But there is something to biking that, for me, besides running, I don't know what it is. It's more relaxing, even though you're getting a good workout with it too. So I can see, what kind of bike are you riding in San Francisco anyway? Because I imagine it's a street bike, but you got all those hills anyway. So you're like training for the Tour de France out there.
Dude, I mean, a number of different bikes, honestly, like, single speed track bike, a 1x9 sort of like, town bike, but had a bunch of different ones and different sort for different climates and how I was feeling different, depending on how I was feeling that day, but mostly sort of in that like single speed 1x9 family.
Interesting. A lot of hills in San Francisco. I don't even like walking up them.
Yeah, totally, man. I was in really good shape back then, so I miss it.
I don't think you had a choice. That's actually a pretty great way to stay in shape. So I want to kind of go back to the beginning of your journey, because you've Blackbird has been in the news. You've gotten a lot of recognition. You guys are doing great things. But I hope what a lot of people who watch the show understand is that it doesn't always work out for everybody. Not everything is a win after win after win. There's a lot of struggle that's involved in things along the way. So, I was trying to look at a lot of your articles, and a lot of it had to do with where HERBL is now in the delivery, and I want to get there because there's a ton of interest there. But I saw one guy at Forbes that wanted to dig into your background and discover that you had dropped out of high school in ninth grade. You had struggled with homelessness. And I'd really like to understand, because those are not easy things to deal with. And when we're kids and your parents talk to you, that's not the path that they say to becoming an entrepreneur. But having said that, when you look at a lot of the greats out there, when you look at a lot of the people who are not just entrepreneurs, but the top tier ones that we see on Shark Tank and in the news and on social media, this story is not, I don't want to say it's not uncommon, because it's certainly unique, but you see a lot of people that are willing to do whatever they can, or came from a bad situation and they learned, like, hey, I don't ever want to be there again, so I'm going to do whatever I can to not be there. So if you don't mind, and I don't know how easy this is for you to talk to us about kind of the beginning of that journey and where you started getting your acumen for business and things like that along the way, because you have the true entrepreneur's journey of learning. I don't want to say from the streets, but yeah, from learning from life, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel very, appreciate the opportunity and platform to talk about it, because I think those of us obviously that work in cannabis, we work to destigmatize the plant every day, right? But many of us are still contending with, stigmas in other aspects of our life, whether that be mental health or homelessness, addiction, etc. And I think like we have a unique opportunity and the unique capacity as people working in the cannabis space to talk about these other things that could also use that sort of that platform, and like I said, that effort in destigmatizing. And so yeah, for me personally, man, like I dropped out of high school, dropped out of school very young. I was making some choices in my life that high school or school or any structure really wasn't really conducive with. And you could say that was probably the start of my like entrepreneurial training was, like many people working in cannabis today, selling weed in middle school, graduating into other substances over time. And like, while that was, well, I think that sort of set the framework for me as an entrepreneur, it also sent me down a path that had some real severe consequences. I talk about it a little bit in that Forbes article, but those consequences were, not really having the choice to continue my education, finding myself, suffering from pretty severe addiction issues, and ultimately finding myself homeless in San Francisco, and kind of looking up one day and wondering like, man, how did I get here? Right. Like sort of doing that inventory, trying to understand how I'd gotten there and like what I was going to do to course correct. But that course correction was really difficult because it'd been, the better part of a decade for me. And so, when we talk about like becoming a bicycle messenger, that's kind of the path I found, right? Like was able to sort of find, take advantage of something that I was passionate about to find a career. And originally just started out wanting to be a bicycle messenger, loved that, but ultimately always had a passion to be my own boss, right? Because I had been my whole adolescence and into adulthood. And so trying to find a way to convert that path that I found to sort of pull myself up from where, the lowest point in my life to actually, again, working for myself and engaging in an entrepreneurial venture.
It's interesting because it's been a huge topic of discussion the past few years. I know Gary Vee's huge on it, is college and formal education in general, right? And you look back on the things you learned in school and the basics you use every day, reading, writing, arithmetic, things like that. But, there's a lot of shit you don't use. I look back on my college career and I don't think I used any of it. I also wasn't a very good college student too, but, we look at this and is this really the only path for people? Right. And I look at someone like you who, you know, if we listened to what your teachers were saying back then and took that to heart, I don't think it's true, because you wouldn't be sitting where you are today. So I'm curious to know, with someone like you and with the conversations around mental health and everything else, you know, was it just that what was being taught to you just wasn't interesting? It didn't catch your attention, didn't keep your attention. So your mind would wander to these other things. And, you know, the unfortunate part that drugs might have been the quickest way for you to develop a business, because there's not too many businesses available to a young kid that is in high school, right? That if you had another outlet for that entrepreneurial spirit or something like that that you could have latched onto, that it would have been different. And it wasn't until that you found the courier career that you're like, damn, I like this. Now I want to learn everything about it. That if something like that would have came into your life earlier, that you had a passion for, or even if cannabis was legal back then, or decriminalized, that would have been a different story for you.
Yeah. I mean, I would say like the number one character trait that I see in all successful entrepreneurs that, you know, I've had the benefit of either knowing or coming into contact with is curiosity, right?
Yeah.
And like how people choose to feed that curiosity is really unique to them. And some people feed that through continued education, right? And while I didn't go to college, I don't think it's necessarily the wrong path. It wasn't the right path for me, but I was incredibly curious about lots of things, right? Not just being an
Yeah.
entrepreneur, starting a business, but just generally speaking, like I'm a curious person. And I was able to sort of feed that. I was able to feed that curiosity by sort of taking this path of becoming my own boss, becoming an entrepreneur, starting a business, and growing and scaling that business. And so like, you know, that's really what it was for me. And I think that's what it is for a lot of entrepreneurs. It's like finding a way to feed that curiosity.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think, you know, like I said, going back, I had a better thought than this, but I lost it. So now I have to go with this inferior thought. Um, but you know, I make the joke that in 18 years, like I'm doing a Florida prepay for my daughter, and I'm like, is she even going to go to college in 18 years? Is it going to be a thing? And I look back on my own college career. You made the one thing that I pointed at, that you said that I'd like to point out, is the continued education, right? Because that's where I think really differentiates entrepreneurs and just successful people in general from those that are not, because we're force fed this education for most of our lives. But I don't know if we're ever really taught to learn on our own and go discover things and be curious. And I, you know, political views aside, I think the education system is leaning further and further away from that because of standardized testing and things like that. Right. That they're, we don't need to go on that tangent, but you know, when we look at it that way, you're spoon fed this education. I remember my own college career, you know, there were a lot of classes that I just went to. I went there, I did what they needed me to do, and I didn't care about it. You know, and I wanted to get out. But then there were certain classes, and I remember particularly there was this business marketing class. I loved it. I didn't want to miss it. I always wanted to be in class. I paid attention. I took notes. I would go off on tangents on my own, discover new things, you know, and really started educating myself. And I think, me personally, in my opinion, is that's what's missing from our formal education system, where they're like, oh, if you want to go into marketing, you know, you need 5 life sciences and this and that before we'll even let you in the school of business. And it's like, well, you know, why do I need to know about marine biology? Like, I'm sure it's okay to have a general understanding of it, but I'm paying you guys a few tens of $1,000s a year. Like, how about you just take me a couple marketing classes? And if marine biology somehow fits into that and you can explain it to me, then I'll take that class. So, you know, I look at it this way, and then I see someone like you. That to me is the differentiator, is that continuing education. And I imagine that's one of your strengths, is the ability to see something that either that you're passionate about or something that's going to affect your business and really dive into it and almost obsess over it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head, right? It's like, we don't teach spreadsheets in high school.
No.
Like, you might get access to Excel, but like, I don't know about you, but I work in spreadsheets all day, every day, right? Like, regardless of what department within my business I'm working with, right? Like, we're all using spreadsheets. And if you're not taught that in school, like, you have to learn that on your own or by
Yeah.
someone kind of showing you. And so I think like that's indicative of sort of how education is set up today. Like, are we setting our, people up to succeed? I don't know the answer to that, but what I can say is that like we encourage continuing education at Blackbird for all of our employees, whether they're drivers, software engineers, salespeople, CS people. We think that like we know we work in an evolving field, technology
Yeah.
and cannabis, and we even if we knew everything that we needed to know today, if we stop learning today, tomorrow we're behind.
Yeah.
And so like we have to keep like kind of insatiable about that drive, that drive for to be curious, and that drive to continue to learn more and more all the time.
Very cool. Well, I will stop my trashing of the U.S. Education system for a second here, but I really think it's important for people to understand your journey, and hopefully it inspires a few folks along the way. That doesn't mean, if you don't come from, if you come from means and anything else, you can still be successful. You just, the moral of this story is you got to work at it, and you got to do it on your own. No one's going to help you do it. And folks like Tim are a great example of that. So you've gotten past that. You started the courier company. Things are going in the right direction. You're living in Reno, Nevada. And all of a sudden, either you were in a conversation, the idea sparks, hey, we can do what we're doing to cannabis. Is the original idea picking up cannabis on bikes and bringing it to people? How does it evolve into this technology company that you are today? It's funny, you used a line, and I use Domino's as an example in a past life for another piece of technology, but you're like, Domino's is a technology company that just happens to sell pizza. Blackbird is a, logistics technology company that happens to deliver weed or work with weed. So how do you go from bicycle cannabis couriers, which by the way, there I see the business opportunity because they've run New York forever. But from cannabis business couriers to where you are today, talk a little bit about that, the original idea and the evolution.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, again, we saw the opportunity because we knew, like, having worked in, as a courier in these larger cities, like this isn't a new concept, right? Like you said, cannabis is delivered on bike every day in the
I
unregulated
just
market.
real quick, I remember I went up right after I graduated the first year of the new Yankee Stadium, a Yankees Red Sox game, and a friend of mine's like, "Oh, I got a guy," and he shows up on a bike with a backpack, comes to the hotel, and it was the first time. Again, I didn't start really smoking until after I got out of college. That like he came out with all the different strains and the film containers and everything else. My mind was blown. So,
Yeah,
but yeah,
you were
no, you're
like, dude, I
right.
thought that only existed on Half Baked, right? But no, like that, it's
Yeah,
real. So, I mean, so we saw the opportunity because we were aware that it was already happening, right? Like, we don't want to sort of like take credit for figuring this out as it relates to bikes or as it relates to sort of on demand delivery in cannabis. This has been the way that cannabis is delivered in major cities for a very long time.
yeah,
And so, what we did see is the opportunity to do that in a regulated market. And as Nevada transitioned to legalized medical use, we were like, we're in, let's figure it out. And luckily, we had some family and friends that were awarded licenses both on the retail and wholesale side. So we're sort of able to pick their brains about what their plans were going to be to solve some of their logistics issues. And the resounding answer is we don't have a solve for that problem. We're focused on growing and selling cannabis. And so, we uh, we endeavored to solve that problem for them, and it was received really well. And the business sort of took off out of the gate, right? Like, we're going to apply our knowledge and on-demand logistics to cannabis. It was well received. Everybody wanted it. What we found very, very quickly is that, and I think a lot of new entrants or new operators in cannabis find this to be the case, is that like the businesses that we ran, the softwares that we leveraged to run those businesses weren't adequate for cannabis, whether it was because they were just set up differently, configured differently, or didn't sort of have the regulatory component that was necessary in this industry. There just wasn't anything off the shelf that we could utilize. Luckily, we had some close friends that worked in technology at a very high level that were ready to build something that they had some ownership in and were easy to convince to come join us in this new venture at Blackbird. And so really early on, we paired sort of what we say, like we paired software and services together to provide the logistics offering that we have today.
That is very cool because again, I love seeing the progression where the basic idea was, yeah, we're guys on bikes delivering weed. It's a tale as old as time. And then all of a sudden it's like, all right, well, let's get some logistics software. Well, this isn't going to work. Well, this isn't going to work. Well, screw it. Let's do it ourselves. Right. And that's exactly where the entrepreneurial spirit comes from. I saw another thing that was interesting. I think I read it correctly that the Nevada beverage companies or the alcohol companies tried to block anybody new from coming into being able to distribute cannabis, and that you actually had to be one of these alcohol distribution companies to be able to do so, which blows my mind because they don't know anything about it. It's a completely different license, completely different industry, completely different product, right? Different locations that it's being delivered to, and it's regulated different. But instead of letting that stop you or trying to fight it, you're like, well, cool, we'll get our alcohol delivery license. You got the alcohol delivery license, and it gave you the ability to dominate Nevada the way that you did.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like a potential sort of kill shot, right, to our business. So we started our business in 2015 under medical regulations, and the voters approved adult use in 2017, and it launched July 1st of 2017. But the ballot initiative for adult use was essentially drafted by alcohol distributors in the state of Nevada, where we have some of the largest in the country, right? And so within that ballot initiative, it gave preferential treatment to existing alcohol distributors by making the cannabis distribution license sort of like a gating item was having an alcohol distribution license as well. Fun thing was the alcohol distributors who issue the licenses, so the board that issues those licenses is made up of existing alcohol distributors. So when Blackbird went to apply, was like, oh, we need this alcohol distribution license in order to continue doing the business we're doing today in cannabis, we met sort of like a brick wall, right? And it was basically conveyed to me, there's no chance, Tim, you're getting an alcohol distribution license because we know you're getting it to sort of own the market as it relates to cannabis distribution. So luckily we had a friend who has a small wine distributorship out of Reno, Nevada. He offered to let us leverage that license to get our cannabis distribution license. And 12 days into the adult use market, so July 12th of 2017, we were able to get our cannabis distribution license and become the only licensed distributor in a state where you are required to move cannabis through a distributor. So we were the only one that could essentially move product from wholesale to retail for months.
Interesting. So I did not know that about the Nevada market. So cultivators can't directly work with retail. You have to go through a distributor.
Correct.
Wow.
But as a cultivator, you can get a distribution license.
Got it.
So lots, if not most, cultivators and producers in the state do layer on a distribution license, but most still work with Blackbird to be able to affect that. They just want the ability to do it themselves if they get in a pinch, and we don't block them from doing that.
Very cool. So, Blackbird has been on an interesting journey with partners and everything else. But, I feel, and I feel like the media and everybody else feels that you guys found a great home now with HERBL. They're doing great in California. I think that you guys are a missing piece that it should be a marriage made in heaven. So, you went through a few other partners, and we can circle back to that in a second, but I want to focus on HERBL. When this opportunity finally came up and you saw the ability, to partner with someone like them, after what you had been through, was there a point where you're just like, no, I want to figure out a way to keep Blackbird independent and operate our own and ultimately make it into my vision? Or was it, I want to do that, but I see HERBL coming in and that's going to make it a lot easier. And I think we can be even bigger than before. It's just, tell me about the opportunity, because, somebody else who had been through your path, they might have been a little trigger shy to bring on another partner that way.
Yeah. And we absolutely were, right? I mean, we were acquired by a public company in 2019. That acquisition didn't go exactly as how we thought it it was going to, for lots of reasons, macro market dynamics, internal dynamics, what have you, right? And ultimately I was able to buy the company back from that parent company at the end of 2020. And so absolutely, man, like a very large part of me was saying, we're not going to go down that path again. We're going to stay independent. Um, but that was really because we'd had a bad experience, right?
Yeah.
And I think that, like, I think about it in terms of relationship, right? Like, when you get out of a bad relationship, most people are reluctant to go into another relationship very quickly. But if it's the right relationship with the right partner, you might be missing out on a huge opportunity by sort of closing yourself off. And that's how we thought about HERBL. And I'll tell you what, I mean, HERBL is awesome. They're incredibly like-minded people from a business perspective. They're incredibly like-minded people from from a personal perspective. We approached, we think about the industry in the same way. We think about employment in the same way, and we think about success in the same way. And so, to your point, like, we saw an opportunity with HERBL that didn't exist in previous partnerships, or in our previous acquisition, and felt really, to use a buzzword, like synergistic in ways that we were really excited about, right? Like, as you said, HERBL, dominant, best in class, classic distributor in the state of California,
Yeah.
has achieved a huge amount of success in a very short period of time. And they've done that by focusing on servicing their brand, their portfolio brands, and their retail partners as best as they possibly can, and being laser focused on that. And I think, like, that's somewhat unique in the cannabis space. I think, like, I'm somebody who sees announcement after an announcement on LinkedIn about fundraising and partnerships and all this good news, and I start to feel like a little, I don't know, like a little imposter syndrome, right?
Mm-hmm.
A little just like, like, are we, is that the measurement of success? Are we measuring up against that? And feeling nervous that we aren't. And what I saw in HERBL is an organization that didn't talk about it, but we're walking the walk every single day. And
Yeah.
that's who I wanted to align ourselves with, because we believe, like, that's who the winners are going to be.
It's interesting that you bring that up with the imposter syndrome thing. I actually, funny enough, I talk about that with Rosie Matteo a lot. And
Yeah.
clearly, what Rosie has done and what she has
Yeah.
built and how personable she is. So, it's interesting. It made me feel better that someone like Rosie goes through the same thing. It makes me feel better that you're bringing it up today too. But it is hard, right? You've done so much. Everything that we've talked about today so far has been a roadblock that you I don't want to say easily overcome, because I'm sure at the time it was more challenging, but that you've been able to overcome and keep going. There are not too many founders and entrepreneurs that can have their company be acquired and then get it back so they can continue to go. A lot of people at that point might have said, shit, okay, what does my non-compete look like? Can I do this again? Can we get other partners involved? And we'll just start from scratch. For
Yeah.
you to be able to get your company back is huge. And that's a huge thing. And I know for me personally, and the reason I went on this little rant is I do that a lot too. I'll go through other podcasts and other ones that pop up, and I see what they're doing and how they're marketing. And I'm just like, it's hard for me to say, no, just stay in your lane and do your thing, because no one else is doing your thing. Because I see, this podcast will have 1,000 subscribers, 1,500 subscribers, and I'm doing it for twice as long as they are. But then all of a sudden they stop and they don't put out content, right? Or something else happens. So I think, that's another great lesson that you're giving people is there is a lot of noise out there, and you got to kind of pay attention to it because you need to know what's going on in the industry, but you can't really let it affect your decision making too much. And I think that's something a lot of people, especially in today's age, the kids who grew up with social media. I mean, for me, I started on social media around 19, which is still a little younger than I think is healthy. I don't know. But you have these kids that are growing up with likes and comments, and you when we were in high school, you kind of assumed who was popular and who had friends and everything else based on what you saw. But now you kind of have documentation of it, and I just feel so bad for them.
Yeah, you're crowdsourcing self-esteem, right? Like I think
Yeah.
that's a Kanye line, but I mean, I think Warren Buffett says, right, like all businesses have problems, and if they tell you they don't, they have more problems than the others.
Yeah.
And so like that it's just and that's okay, right? Like you don't get better unless you have problems that you have to ultimately overcome. And so we sort of try to remind, we've had a pretty arduous path as a business, but one thing I say to our team, and I think they really believe, is like we're not done yet. We have
Yeah.
not, we've come to, we set a big goal for ourselves and we've come to accomplish that goal and we haven't yet. And so like we're not packing it in until we do. And whether that means we're two steps behind our competitor or even half step ahead, like it doesn't change how we approach every day, which is like we're going out there to serve the cannabis community and consumers who want to purchase cannabis products online, better than anybody else. And that's how, that's what we're thinking every day.
It's interesting, not even interesting. I like the way that you've kind of approached your markets. Because to me, you've approached it like the newer crop of MSOs that are, I say, did things the right way, right? You had the first crop that raised a whole bunch of money and tried to get as big as they can, as fast as they can, and they went for market share, which is a leftover model from the tech bubble and the tech days, where you have not even leftover from the bubble, but more recently, where you have companies like, Uber and everything else, that it's all about market share. It's all about market share. And at some point you can turn the revenue on, but it's a lot different when you have a piece of technology that way. And it's just a matter of flipping a switch versus user adoption and everything else like that. So a lot of these MSOs that stayed in their state, had a couple stores or one store, figured out their SOPs, did it right, made sure all the kinks were worked out, became either cash flow positive or profitable, and then moved on to the next state. Those are the ones that we're seeing success from. I feel like you kind of did the same thing with Blackbird, where you focused on Nevada and you dominated Nevada. I mean, dominated. I can say that as someone who competed with you in the past. And you made sure that you knew what you were doing in Nevada before you moved on. And now you're in a position where you know the SOPs, you have the references and everything in Nevada. You know the markets, you know the nuances, you have the experience, that I feel like it's much easier for you to expand and gain market share in other markets because you have such a dominance in the one that you started in.
Yeah, I mean, we love the Nevada market. It's been a fantastic place for us to start our business. There are, things, that we would change about it, but like overall, it's been a great market for a few reasons. One, cannabis community here is fantastic.
It is.
Two, there's some really great operators, right? Like the GTIs and Air Wellnesses of the world. And so it's a market that has very capable and sort of, national players with a national presence, which has been great for us. And it's a market where regulators are really open to the evolution of the regulatory structure. So we love that. And I totally agree with you, Todd. I think that early on, the question cannabis companies were asking themselves is how much money can we raise?
Yeah.
And now the smarter cannabis companies are asking themselves, what's the cost of this capital? Right. And like all capital is not created equal. And those two, like that sort of slight variation on approach is, in my opinion, what separates, the people that are going to be around 10, 20, 30, 100 years from now from the companies that are hoping to exit in the next 2 or 3 years.
I agree, man. It's really been interesting to see. Now, so where you sit in the marketplace, especially from, being able to connect wholesale with retail, also you have end customer delivery as well too. So you have both B2B and B2C, which is incredible. The amount of data that you have access to has got to be, I mean, you probably have better insight into the markets that you're in than most people do in those markets.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say to, prospective and existing clients, like we have more data on more supply chain data than Metric does, right? And I think like that's really important to our long-term vision. But another sort of like benefit we saw to doing this deal with HERBL and to joining the HERBL family is like it's a lot to focus on so much of the supply chain, right?
Yeah.
And we see our value proposition long term and our passion long term is like connecting brands and retailers to the end consumer. Like that is something that I think, brands and retailers will always be hungry for.
Yeah.
And that's where I think our unique value proposition lies. Whereas herbal, you know, they are streamlining the supply, the B2B supply chain, right? So from cultivation to production, ultimately to retail. And, their customers, obviously their brand portfolio, but also retailers. And like, that's where their expertise lies. And so those two things are really beneficial to one another, and where we see the businesses kind of focusing long term to be able to tackle this big supply chain problem together.
So to me, your partnership with HERBL is really the proper way that this industry should grow, right? You both two individual companies that did very well on their own and complement each other well. So they come together to form a better solution, right? Your previous acquisition, it's a roll-up strategy, and that's a
Yeah.
very big strategy in PE, and it doesn't always work. I like to think that are a lot of technologies in cannabis that just weren't fully baked yet. They needed more time. They needed to figure out who they were, what they were. Too many people tried to be everything to everyone because you have so many different markets that have so much different regulations, right? That I don't know if technology in this space was ready for that kind of roll up yet, right?
Yeah.
Where you guys sit with HERBL, that is a nice compliment. Now, obviously the company that you were with before has shifted and they're doing very well, and I know the people there and they're great people. I'm sure you still have good relationships there, but I think what happened to you, and it's funny when you can hindsight it, it was positive, right? I'm sure going through it,
Yeah.
is not fun. It's funny, we read all these books from all these entrepreneurs and they talk about living in their car and this, that, and the other. And, they have these great lives now, and we romanticize these stories, but you don't realize it. No one really stops to think when you're going through it sucks at the time, but it's fun. I don't know if it's fun to look back on, but it is part of the journey.
Dude, absolutely, man. I mean, I would do that deal again, right? Like I wouldn't take
Yeah.
that back. We learned a ton. We made a lot of mistakes, right? And I think that but ultimately we learned from it. I still sit on the board of that organization. You're right. Like they are on a clear path now, and it's one that they're uniquely situated to be winners in. But it wasn't the right fit for us, and we
Yeah.
acknowledged that last year, and then sort of charted a path to pull the company out, really to the benefit of the parent company and to the benefit of Blackbird. And so I think that we learned some really valuable lessons. We made some mistakes that took us quite a bit of time to sort of remedy, and even some of them today, still finding our way back from. But ultimately, I feel personally like I got 20 years of business experience in 18 months. So I feel, super grateful for that. And I get to sit on the board of a publicly traded company as someone who didn't graduate high school, who probably would have never had that opportunity otherwise.
Yeah,
Pretty-
man. No. So I mean, the thing is, your story lines up perfectly for a book or a movie. So I'm sure I hope that comes out soon. But like I said, it's just not fun going through it at the time, but it makes you who you are, and that's what it is. To your point, obviously, I don't want to compare it to my journey to yours, but I remember losing my job 2 weeks before my daughter was born. It was my first job in cannabis. It was a great job. I was part of a venture capital group. We did events too. Long story short, that company isn't around anymore. But if that didn't happen the time it happened and in the place that I was, I wouldn't be sitting here and doing this show, because that's ultimately what led me to be doing this, right? And not saying that this show has changed my life, but it's put me in a position in the cannabis space to be in front of folks like you and your former partners and your new partners and so many people in this space that, it's funny. I had breakfast with someone today. I said, it's built me a network that I don't deserve. And he goes, well, you did 150 shows. You didn't really make any money off of them. You've put hours of work into them. You've done them when your kids went to sleep on the weekend and everything else. Why do you think you don't deserve it? I'm like, well, because I'm Jewish and I'm self-deprecating. But besides that, I don't know. Maybe I do. So it's interesting. We put in this work and we don't, I think we do personally. We have a very bad, I know I do. I'm very bad at recognizing the work that I've done to get where I am, because I see people like you and your journey is very different and you're at a different part in your journey. But, it's like, it goes back to that imposter syndrome. Like, I haven't done what he's done yet, but maybe I won't, maybe I will. And I think that's very interesting to hear.
Yeah, I mean, dude, your journey is yours, right? And I think that like that's okay and a great thing. And I like really do believe things happen for a reason. I think that we, went into our previous situation because we needed to learn some things about ourselves and about our business that are ultimately going to contribute to our success, not take away from it. And so like, yeah, my mom always says, like, as I was making bad choices growing up, she's like, look, dude, the hard way is hard.
Yeah.
And just like, if you're going to make these choices, just know that. And so I think about that all the time. But it's about putting the work in. And dude, if you did 150 shows unpaid, you deserve the success that you have today.
Well, thank you very much. Well, now we have our great sponsor, Contempo Specialty Packaging, so we got to thank them. But yeah, man, it's I appreciate that. So before I let you go, I just want to kind of talk about, because you have such great insight into the markets there. We're at a place in time after the pandemic, towards the end of the pandemic, wherever you want to call it. We're definitely not after that. Cannabis is changing, right? Um, before you had to put good product out and people would buy it. And a lot of, there's value customers, there are hypebees, there's all these different people, but there wasn't a ton of great branding, in my opinion. I think that's changing. I know that's changing. I see it now. And you're starting to see branding coming forward where it is not at this point where you can't just put out fire weed. You have to have other brands. You have to have a story behind you and everything else. And you're starting to see brands come. We had Lowell that got bought. They were an early one. You see Old Pal starting to expand into different markets. They very much touch on the nostalgia. You see a lot of these celebrity brands coming up. I happen to be part of one with Heisman, the best celebrity brand with the most authentic story, just in case everyone wants to know. I got to push my product there. But do you really see the transition of the cannabis space now where it is truly becoming more of a CPG business than just a commodity? It was almost commoditized to where it was, what is your value to THC percentage, or what does the customer know about you, to where now we really are starting to build brand affinity.
Yeah. Dude, it's a CPG industry, and I love that, right? Like I'm someone who loves beautiful packaging and a good
Yeah.
brand story, but I'm also someone who is passionate about the plant and the different effects that you can garner from it as a consumer, whether that be for medical reasons or recreational purposes. Like, it's a really powerful product. And yeah, so we're seeing that too, right, on our end, like the sort of like acceleration towards sort of a true CPG industry is happening. There's obviously some hurdles from the sort of fragmented regulatory environment, but the pace has hastened, to say the least. And like, I'm really excited about that. I think consumers feel really excited about that. It starts to answer some of the like questions that consumers have and how they enter like their point of access, right? Like, we've historically tried, as an industry, tried to describe the efficacy of products to consumers, right? Like, pretty unsuccessfully, in my
Yeah.
opinion. And now that brands are telling those stories, right, like about their products through their branding, through their messaging, is an exciting place to be in the cannabis industry. I mean, we're like probably so many of your listeners, like I still remember the Way on the Spot, right? Like, and I know when we started to build out our technology, I was like, Way on the Spot is not staying. I'm glad I don't have to eat those
Yeah.
words. But yeah, it's making that sort of that transition quickly, and we're seeing, I think, starting to see potential winners emerge, and that's like a pretty cool, interesting place to be.
Yeah, no, I agree, man. I'm very excited to see the future of this industry and the brands that come up, and the both the authentic and the bullshit stories. You've got cool authentic stories like obviously Heisman, like Viola, a lot of those, and then you have, listen, David Elias. I think he did a great job, but we all know that there's no William Bull Lowell. He doesn't fucking exist. It's complete bullshit. But you did a great job getting the rest of us to buy into that. So, it's interesting, but those fake, I don't want to say fake brands, but those brands that are created around just an idea have a place too. And I'm really excited to see the industry go forward. I showed some great packaging. Our CEO of Heisman, Eric Hammond, started introducing me to the world of high-end accessories. So like to start seeing things like this. So this is a guy I'm interviewing on Thursday. His name's Todd Wayne. The company's called Free Minded. If anybody is interested, this is just a high end joint tube, right? You got two joint tubes that are sewn together by leather. You've got these things, these lighter covers, because I always wanted a cool lighter, but I had a Zippo, and anybody who's used a Zippo with cannabis, it doesn't really work that well. So I'm like, well, I guess I'm just stuck with a Bic. So to see the industry changing where you have, you know, the accessory brands even coming in like Higher Standards and Edie Parker and, you know, Todd's brand Free Minded, it's, to me, that's so cool. It's so cool seeing it comes to the forefront, and all my friends that used to consume cannabis with me when we were getting it from the black market, and they're seeing, you know, the tchotchkes and shit that I have. It blows our mind to see how mainstream it's becoming.
Yeah, it's really wild, man. I mean, I have a lot of family in New York, right? And to hear like our 21, 22-year-old cousins talking about cookies, and like that's the brand that they recognize and are excited about is a little bit mind-blowing. Because when I was in, I grew up in the Central Valley in California, and like even as like a ninth grader, right? Like cookies was on the scene, but it was this like very underground thing. And to see that commercialized, but in a way that still is like representative and reflective of the sort of roots of that brand is exciting and encouraging for the future of the industry. That's for sure.
It's crazy to me to see cookies products in like PacSun and Zoomies and things like that. Like, you know, that those stores, I don't know if they ever had any blatant cannabis apparel or anything else like that. Obviously, cookies is, you know, for the most part, you would have to go to Spencer Gifts for that kind of stuff. But, you know, especially when to walk into a PacSun and see cookies branded apparel, it here in Boca Raton, Florida, in a medical market, to me, just, you're right, that stuff blows my mind. Absolutely.
Crazy to the
Um,
cookies guys too, right?
what's that?
It's crazy to the cookies guys too, right? Because
Yeah, I'm
like
sure.
sort of just like, yeah, a passion for the plant like ultimately turns into that, and the number of lives that changes for the better is like I think what this industry is all about.
100%. This industry has been very good to me. It's been a lot of fun, and you know, this is where I found my passion, and this is where I found my work ethic. You know, because I get to talk to people like you who have done it, and you guys are open and honest and authentic, and that's, I think, the coolest thing. I think a lot of people in this industry are sick of a lot of the bullshit that they put up in other industries, and when they get here, they just want to be themselves, because that's part of it, right? As cannabis users as a whole, at some point in your life, for the most part, you had to be closeted, you know, and
Yeah.
depending on who you're around, but you were closeted for your cannabis use, whether it was your parents, whether it was your friends, whether it was your professional life, but there was someone that you were hiding it from. And when you get into this industry, and now people know that that's what you do for a living, and that's what pays the bills, and that's what pays for your kids' education and everything else, you have the ability to say, yeah, I smoke cannabis, I use this, it pays for my life, and it helps a lot of people out. You know, I'm very proud of that. And I don't know about you, but I'm very proud to be a part of the industry in that way.
Dude, I'm super proud. I took my kid to preschool for the first, he started preschool yesterday, and I didn't realize until I got there, like we're doing, first day of school, all the parents dropping their kids off, and I'm wearing like you know, uh, what we call our Be Good People, Help Good People line at Blackbird, which is like a line of apparel that all the proceeds go to benefit those either currently or formerly incarcerated for cannabis crimes. And I looked down, didn't even realize I was wearing that shirt, and had probably 3 to 5 parents ask me what it was about, and all be really excited about
Yeah.
that. That's like, dude, that's a huge change from even a couple of years ago. Pretty cool stuff.
No, I remember when I just did my job update to Heisman, the amount of comments and everything else I got was amazing. I wanted to respond like, "You assholes know I did 150 episodes of a show about cannabis, about the cannabis industry, but we'll just ignore that until you saw the actual official position." But listen, Tim, I know that I booked an hour of your time. Um, you know, before I let you go, we talked about the past a lot. We talked about your insight into the market, but I'd really like to get some forward thinking insight from you. You know, what excites you about just the partnership with HERBL looking forward the next 6-12 months? Excited about the industry. Just tell us what you're looking forward to for this year and next.
Absolutely, man. I mean, I think we see an opportunity for national distribution presence. So obviously, market leaders in Nevada and California today, but looking at national expansion as quickly and efficiently as possible, but also as responsibly as possible. So that's sort of one aspect that I'm really excited about is that expansion and proliferation of what we're doing today on the West Coast. And then the other thing that I'm like incredibly passionate about, and I think the industry is just starting to see done in a sort of a robust way, is direct to consumer. So delivering products for brands on behalf of brands to the end consumer, but working with traditional brick and mortar retail to really like sort of rising tide lifts all boats and provide more access to consumers in cannabis, again, nationally.
That's one of my favorite things to do is to open an app like yours and show people like, hey, look, I can shop for this online and I can have it delivered to my house. This is where the cannabis industry is. Now we can do that in Florida. It's not as good as you provide it in Nevada and California, but when this market gets a little bit more mature, I'm sure you guys will be here.
Absolutely, man.
Very cool, man. Well, listen, dude, I hope I get the chance to meet you in person, whether the next trip out to California, maybe MJ BizCon, we'll figure that out. But it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today.
Absolutely, Todd. Thanks so much for having me, man. And thanks so much to everybody who listens.
Absolutely. And thank you, everybody at home. This has been another episode of Elevate Your Grind. Of course, if you missed any part of this episode, you can watch it again on Monday on YouTube at youtube.com/elevate your grind. That's where we have our entire library of shows. Please like and subscribe. It allows us to keep providing this great content to you. Of course, if you don't want to watch my beautiful face, you can listen to us on the go on Apple or Spotify or Stitcher or any of the other ones. Again, you idiots are only going to Apple and Spotify, so I'm going to stop saying the rest of them soon. But folks, this has been another episode of Elevate Your Grind. We are going to be live again on Thursday with Todd Wayne of Free Minded. We're going to go through his library of high-end accessories. I love this case. This is definitely something you guys should check out. And we've got a few more guests. I'm going to be traveling here and there. I promise we'll get some consistency in when these shows air. But until then, we will be here and we'll see you soon.